Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us at our HPC Day Digital Series. Today, we are going to be talking about HSBC's journey to Google Cloud, and we have joining us GFT and TIBCO, both of which are partners who helped HSBC move to the cloud. My name is Wyatt Gorman. I am the High Performance Computing Solution Manager at Google Cloud, and today we have with us Tim, Mike, and Jonathan from HSBC, TIBCO, and GFT, respectively. So if you could all introduce yourselves. Tim, why don't you start us off?
Hi, I'm Tim Smolcic. My role is Director of Cloud for Markets and Security Services at HSBC. So what I do is I work on the strategies for our cloud migrations to help find that business value that we can drive and any cost reduction activities as a result of our cloud migration.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Mike?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mike Kennedy from TIBCO Software, and I am in charge of Data Synapse Engineering, which is the product that HSBC and many other banks use for their HPC workloads.
Thanks, Mike. And Jonathan?
Jonathan Watson. So I'm a technical architect with GFT. I've worked for many years with TIBCO Data Synapse product in a couple of banks, running large-scale operations, and currently, I've been involved with the HSBC Grid Migration Project.
Excellent. Thank you all. So we have a pretty straightforward agenda for you guys today. Obviously, we've covered our intros. So most of the session today will be taken up by our panel discussion between the four of us. And then we'll have some time to wrap up, answer some questions from our questions feature, and provide you with some resources to take home. Just a reminder again, we do have a chat feature below for any questions or comments throughout the webinar. While we are speaking or afterwards, the four of us will be available, as well as many other members of our extended team, to answer any of your questions. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So I think, Tim, let's start with you. From HSBC's perspective, could you tell us a little bit about the HPC journey that HSBC's market and security services took to the cloud, and about the business problem that was addressed?
Absolutely. So within HSBC Market and Security Services, we've been moving to GCP since end of 2018, early 2019. We started that by looking at four key targeted applications that would form the basis of our cloud migrations and pathways for future applications. So since 2019 to now, we now have over 100 workloads on GCP, and we faced several key issues with our on-premise HPC estate that led us to reconsider our approach. Firstly, we had a very large on-premise estate with hardware that was becoming end of life. We had tens of thousands of cores that we had to find a new home for. We had software that was also reaching end of life, so we had to do a rebuild of our estate. We had very limited timelines to try and procure many physical machines to be able to meet that demand. We also had shrinking capacity within our own data centers and an increasing on-premise cost base. Couple that with an increasing business appetite and demand, we really had to try and find a flexible solution there.
Interesting. And to stay with you for a second, why did you choose Google Cloud for these workloads? What was the transition like? And how long would you say it took to move from on-prem to the cloud from start to finish?
Okay. So we chose GCP for a number of reasons. Firstly, the size of the estate we thought would meet the compute power that we needed. The scale and performance of the global network we thought would give us that resiliency as well. And importantly, the strong partnership that HSBC has with GCP, making sure that whatever solution we implemented was suitable for the financial services industry and meeting all our global regulatory needs. But to be honest, we didn't really know if GCP was going to be the right solution. So we started with partnering with Google to do a quick week-long MVP, and we continued to iterate on that MVP for about 6 months to where we had a fully working system in production. And to put that into context, the team was highly skilled but had absolutely zero experience on cloud prior to doing that MVP. So for an organization as complex as HSBC to be able to pivot so quickly personally speaks volumes to our development teams of how they were able to work closely with Google, upskill and use their existing DevOps and Agile practices to try and get a solution working as quickly as possible. And once we had that solution working, we work very closely with GCP, GFT, and TIBCO to try and industrialize that solution to apply more broadly across our estate.
Great. Jonathan, from GFT's perspective, can you tell me a little bit about how you helped HSBC move to Google Cloud? What kind of architectural and operational considerations were taken into account? Really, how much re-architecting was required for things like storage, especially? And what were some of the top roadblocks that were overcome?
So the application that was first moved onto GCP was considered to be well behaved, and by that really I mean that it uses TIBCO's own data transfer mechanisms for handling data going in and out of the grid. So that was one benefit. The other benefit is that the application took in a substantial amount of data, but tended to return aggregated results as well. And what that meant was that obviously one of the cost drivers of a cloud provider is data egress from the cloud. So although a large amount of data was used to do the calculation, not very much data was sent back out. So taking advantage of those data handling features, and also the fact that Data Synapse is pretty good at dealing with, let's say, less than LAN quality networking, it made sense really to move to be able to run with a client process on premise and simply send those jobs out to a grid on cloud. There's no requirement for storage. There's no requirement for anything other than the compute resources. Manage that infrastructure on cloud, scale it up when we needed it, and then be able to send the results down and tear it down when we finished. There are other grid models that are not as well behaved, but like I say, the application that moved first in HSBC was better behaved. Also, Data Synapse grew up in a world where it was designed to consume spare CPU cycles from workstations on trading floors, and so there's a lot of functionality in there that deals with machines that aren't necessarily reliably there. And that meant that we could make use of Google preemptible instances to bring the cost rate down without having to do any application re-architecture. If you're running on a preemptible machine that goes away, Grid Server will simply reschedule that task. And as far as the application's concerned, the consuming application's concerned, they never needs to know anything about where those resources are coming from. So it makes a lot of sense to be able to use those low cost resources to be able to scale to great heights, and then to be able to stop using that compute when you want to. In terms of roadblocks, networking is always a challenge. Any grid application looks a little bit like a distributed denial of service attack on infrastructure, and so making sure you have the right network in place is always a key. And then again, for us, Tim mentioned the skills required. We find that with the team that's currently in HSBC at the moment, there are two distinct categories of people. So you have Java developers working on the application side, but you also have the DevOps skills as well, and they're both required to be able to make the application work and to make the migration process work. And as I say, right now we've got a team of, I think it's 8 or so people who are a mixture of DevOps and Java, and they're helping HSBC pull all this stuff together and continue to productionize and rationalize the code base that we're using.
Thanks, Jonathan. Tim, if I could go back to you for a second and maybe change gears a little bit, I want to talk about storage and ask where you're maintaining your storage center of gravity, right? How's that changed in your move to cloud? Have you rethought how data and compute co-locate at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So where possible, we definitely want to have our storage as close to our compute. Unfortunately, it's not so straightforward in HSBC. We have a very global footprint. We have to adhere to many different regulations from many different countries. So it's not so straightforward. We need to then balance a technical solution that allows perhaps some of that data staying on-prem versus on the cloud, depending upon what different regulatory bodies and bespoke rules will allow. So that means you really need to have a flexible solution that can span both estates and potentially multiple cloud providers or multiple on-premise estates, which is something that we've had no issues doing with the GCP and TIBCO solution.
Thanks. You mentioned also regulatory requirements and we were talking about security a little bit earlier. Maybe an open question to the group. How has the security and compliance and regulatory concerns changed as you've moved to the cloud versus your on-premise estate?
I'll go first. So it is a very difficult one to get your head around. So depending upon what countries you're in, the rules and regulations can be vastly different. So it's important that we first implement security as a standard on the cloud, ensuring that is definitely much more hardened than our on-premise estate. And that's our starting position. But also ensuring that we work closely with the regulatory bodies in the different jurisdictions that we work within to help the industry as a whole better understand what that means for our data security or security as a whole, to then ensure that we have a more seamless cloud migration, as well as a safe and secure workload for all our clients to house their data.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I'd add to that around security. I mean, one of the patterns that, and HSBC went through this, is that there's a substantial amount of groundwork that needs to be done in an organization before applications can start using, GCP. And I'm working with another organization at the moment who are a lot further behind in that journey. And that's the first piece that you have to get right. And generally speaking, there's a cloud services function that's responsible for defining what that looks like, and then effectively creating an extension of the on-premise data center in cloud. And once that's been seen to be secure, then the application teams and people like grid teams are able to start deploying their application out there. I mean, obviously, data signups comes with features such as HTTPS and payload encryption that help you meet some of those requirements. But the initial step is to have a kind of a structured approach to how you're going to manage the security of your cloud environment in the first place.
Thanks. And Mike, to you, can you tell us, a little bit about how TIBCO integrates with the cloud, and what TIBCO's strategy around cloud computing is going forward? How do you see it changing the way that customers run your software and interact with the infrastructure that they're using? And are there any major considerations that customers should take into account when looking at the cloud?
Well, I would have to say, we have definitely invested in allowing use of preemptible instances, which has been a very popular request and has been talked about. Data Synapse was perhaps easier to fold into that environment just due to its architecture, because it was, designed to be very resilient. We also, as Jonathan just talked about, have had to invest in security as well. We've strengthened the ciphers of things. The move to cloud has forced us to really invest in security. We've even built internally, it's in our lab, we have a version of Grid Server that uses gRPC, which is a new communication standard proposed by Google that is very, very secure and efficient. And so, those are things we're doing. Tim talked about not looking like an attack on the network. We're definitely, that's having an influence on how we architect the future of the product. And so that's a big part of it. We also, Grid Server, Data Synapse Grid Server already started with a ton of horizontal scalability. We've already built grids on the cloud that were over 1 million nodes. And so I'm not aware of any software-based clustering that can do that kind of thing so easily. So that's an advantage we have. But we have, of course, looked to make that better and better on the cloud.
Thanks, Mike. So, Tim, what are some advantages that HSBC has found by migrating to a cloud environment? What does it enable your teams to do, and what kind of capabilities does it unlock?
So by far the biggest benefit we've seen is the elasticity that we can get at scale. So we've easily increased our compute by a factor of 100, particularly during periods of market volatility, which we especially saw during COVID. Another surprising benefit has been how the development teams now start to operate differently. We get much more transparency on our billing to a very granular level. So to the point where within data signups, we can now start to add tags and labels to our algorithms and better understand how each of those algorithms now impact the bill or impact the efficiencies of the workloads and the calculations that we're doing. So it's really good to see how the teams have taken that on board now that they get that transparency. And that's not something that we had to push. Teams naturally start to do that as they get that data available to them. So that's been fantastic. And that's good news for our customers too. Excellent.
Jonathan, so, a common question we get is how can somebody, get started, right? Is there a simple first step that a user could take to start investigating moving their workloads to cloud?
So we have a couple of documents on the GFT website linked on the presentation. One of them is a 2-page introduction to our HPC offering. The other is a more detailed investigation. It's kind of a white paper summarizing across our experience of how various different banks are operating. So it's not specific to any one organization, but it's sort of an amalgamation of a number of different banks' approaches to grid computing, high performance computing. I highly recommend reading that article. We're also working on integrating our high performance computing accelerator, which is basically an automated deployment of grid server into GCP. But we're integrating that with an open source product that we offer called Tranquility Base, which does the infrastructure deployment and builds a cloud landing zone and helps you set up your cloud resources for HPC, but also for various other services as well. So again, Tranquility Base is worth a look. Otherwise, email contact are available on the website. Give us a shout. We can we can arrange engagements from so a week-long conversation about what your requirements are and what you're thinking of doing, and we can offer kind of constructive advice through to several month proof of concept or integration and deployment work. And as I said earlier, we do have teams of DevOps engineers and developers who can help build these infrastructures as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Again, just a quick reminder, there is a chat function below this video where you can ask questions or enter comments, and we are here to answer them for you. So go ahead and enter any questions that you have now. In the meantime, maybe a couple of common questions that we get. What was the most challenging or unexpected part of this whole migration, really start to finish for everybody?
I kind of alluded to it earlier on, but really for us, the technology world goes in cycles. A new thing comes along, everybody tries to play it their own way, everybody sort of experiments with the new technology, and then over time, best practices emerge, and people start to coalesce and agree on a way forward, and you end up with a sort of a coming together of practice across an organization. And I think what we're seeing in HSBC at the moment is the early start phases of that. The GFT teams that are in there at the moment are currently working with a number of different application teams in the investment bank, and we're working on pulling together different implementations of even of grid on cloud and standardizing them, adding kind of resilience, professionalization, generalizing those solutions so that we can start to build a solution that will work across all of the different asset classes and the business groups. And it's really the exciting part is that we're right at the beginning of that stage at the moment where there's a lot of development, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different structures being put in place, and then we can kind of pull that together and forge the best practice out of it so that we come up with really the optimum solution for the whole organization rather than building individual silos of code. So yeah, for me, it's about the collaboration and the integration of all these different approaches to come up to identify and evolve basically the best practice solution that we can find.
Yeah, I'd probably echo similar sentiments. So to be honest, we didn't really know that moving to Google Cloud was going to be the right solution, but we thought it sounded like it was worth trying, and we're able to do that quite quickly, effectively, and cheaply to quantify if it does work, do a quick experiment, verify, and then start to progress the next stage. So it's very important that as more teams start to progress on their cloud migrations, and I think this applies broadly, not just to HPC, that they do that in a quick iterative fashion, because you've now got the ability to do that at scale versus your on-premise estate. So starting to get teams to think about, you don't need to refactor all of your code. You might need to do a quick verification to see, do your hypotheses stack up? Does it work? And then iterate upon that. At least then you're not wasting 12 months trying to procure kit, prove that it works, and then it doesn't, you start again. Here you can get that done very, very quickly. And we were able to do that within a week, which is, you looking back 24 months, you'd be crazy to even recommend something like that.
Excellent. And Jonathan, you mentioned something, and Tim, you mentioned something as well. Jonathan, you talked a little bit about sort of modernizing and maybe changing the way you do things as you move to the cloud. And Tim, you talked a little bit about BigQuery earlier. I'm wondering what everybody thinks maybe is the next step in terms of whether you call it modernizing or the next step beyond lift and shift, right? Are there any thoughts maybe around cost optimization? Tim, you mentioned around what we could do in the cloud to take that next step in terms of making this work really well in the cloud and with the scalability and economics.
Yeah, I think so. So, whenever people talk about cloud strategies, there's always a few different ones that come across the desk: lift and shift, move and improve, completely refactor everything. I think there's a middle ground there. You're not just lifting and shifting. Maybe you're lifting and improving. So you're doing the minimum amount possible to make sure that you're getting a benefit from the cloud. You're not just you're not incurring that technical debt by doing that migration. You're moving just enough at a time to get that business value. And then once you're there and you're live and you're productionized, you can continue to iterate. I think it's important that teams you don't need to get the ideal solution. You don't have to strive for perfection immediately on day one. Make sure you start. You prove out what you can and continue to iterate on that.
I will add, Wyatt, that we're definitely seeing a lot of our customers doing the lift and improve strategy. And we actually have incorporated some features into Data Synapse to make it easier to integrate with a DevOps pipeline. I think that one of the things I'm starting to see is traditionally HPC banking model types of applications have still followed the waterfall model. And I think a lot of people would really like to say, boy, if my trading desk had this idea, if I could be running this other model tomorrow, that would really help my business. So I definitely am seeing that in the, going on in a lot of banks.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your time today. Again, if you have any questions for our panelists, please go ahead and enter them in the chat feature below. We'll be around for a few minutes longer to answer your questions, but otherwise I'd like to thank my panelists, Mike, Tim, and Jonathan, for their time today, and hope everyone has a good one. Thanks very much.